Back to something equally exciting. The judicial branch, as described by the Constitution. Woohoo! Please stay in your seats. Is this an Al Qaeda or ISIS terrorist attack? This class. All right. I do want to cover some of Article 3 today. It's pretty short, and we have another class member coming in. There he is. The Constitution is pretty short here with Article 3. Can you send that back, please? So I want to look at the Constitution, what it says, and then there are several things that are not explicitly in the Constitution that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. Some of the, in the very first statement, in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Look at how Congress has done that. What's the judicial branch look like? So we'll spend some time doing that as well. Okay, somebody tell me, how is the wording different to start Article 3 from Article 2? I mean, more than, Article 2 says the executive power. Article 3 says judicial power. What's, okay, Mary?
Yeah, the Article 2, it's separate. The president is the sole power in him, and then the vice president just helps. And the power is split up. And it's not just the Supreme Court,
Okay.
it's also the little court.
Yeah, we mentioned how it seems like an awkward wording in Article 2. It was explicitly done to make sure the president was solely in charge. Here it's saying this judicial powers and the Supreme Court and these other courts over how Congress ends up organizing things. So not a super big point, but just a point to notice. All right, how long do judges hold their office for?
For life, under good behavior and competence.
Okay, not competence.
Oh,
Just
competence.
Just good behavior. I mean, if it was based on competence, man. I mean, people that argue that freedom of religion means that you can't practice your religion. I don't know, somehow, I still can't wrap my mind around that. But just for good behavior, as long as they don't get convicted of doing something criminal or something bad, good behavior. A little bit of a general description, but good behavior. Talked about, did we finish this paragraph? Did we talk about their pay? I don't think we did. Okay. Let's go and finish reading the paragraph. I know I was trying to rush and get the first paragraph done, and you guys listened slowly last time. So, all right, so let's start with the second sentence in this paragraph. The judges, both of the supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior. Just talked about that. And shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. All right, so they get paid, right, at stated times, these regular time frames. And the important part is it can't be lowered. All right, their pay cannot be lowered. That'd be great if your boss couldn't lower your pay. All right, why do they have this unusual restriction here on their pay? The presidents can't be changed at all.
Because you could tell them, if you don't rule this way.
Yeah, it's to help them be truly independent. If Congress could, at will, strip away all of their pay, that would be a significant power. I think in the fellowship papers, it's something to the effect of a power over a man's purse is, in effect, a power over his life or something like that. If the Congress could meddle with their pay, they could put great pressure on them. In fact, we talked about how the power of the purse is so important, helping rein in the president. They don't use it, but that power is very important. Now, it can't affect his personal paycheck, but the spending is very important. And here they're saying that type of thing can't be used with their pay. So they receive a flat amount, or at least it cannot be diminished. It can't go down. It can go up, but it can't go down. And it can go up because they are potentially there for decades, for very long periods of time, and allow for inflation and other things like that. So. All right. Beyond that, the explicit word here, I want to mention two things that are unique and important about the judicial system set up by the Constitution. All right. The first thing about this is that the judicial branch, judicial power, becomes a distinct part of government, a separate part. Historically, it had been a committee of the legislature or something run by the king. It wasn't a separate and distinct branch. In England, even, we saw the king and parliament fighting it out. But the judicial branch was not a separate and distinct thing. So we have that being created here, a separate branch of government, the judicial branch. And then secondly, we see the judicial authority resting ultimately in the people. Ultimately in the people. Now, it's not directly in the people, but ultimately in the people. How does it ultimately go back to the people, people having a say in this court system?
By the jury.
Okay, well, that wasn't the direction I was thinking, but that's extremely true. We'll get to that. The jury is almost an unlimited power. They're instructed that you have to rule based upon what the law says, but they can really just, we could have video of, who do you want to pick? Davy robbing the store in town, and eyewitnesses, and Davy confessing, and the jury says, no, he's innocent. And really, there's no restrictions at all about the jury. So that is actually extremely important. It's an extremely important check on the judiciary. But that wasn't what I was thinking about.
Well, we elect the guy that can appoint them.
Okay, we elect the president, who appoints them, and then who has to do the approval? More than just Congress. The Senate has to do the approval, which at this point, originally, they were chosen by the state legislatures who were chosen by the people. But anyway, the point is that judicial power ultimately runs back to the people. It's not this thing that's just imposed upon them. They do have a say, but indirectly. Okay, section 1. Questions there? All right, section 2. We're not going to cover in great detail. I know it's disappointing. It lists for us here, we're going to talk about some of it, lists for us the judicial power shall extend. Here we have a list of the types of cases that this court system is going to hear. Okay? And I think the easiest way to think of it is just anything that involves the nation. All right, we'll read down through it, and most of it's pretty self-explanatory. There are some technicalities that are beyond the scope of what we need. If you ever find yourself facing prosecution before the federal judiciary, please do more than consult your government notes. Get some real help. But there's some technicalities that we don't need to deal with in here. But basically, things that involve the whole nation. All right. In the Federalist paper, whichever one it was, you had to compare the list of things that the judicial branch should cover and how it matches. And some of you did or did not do especially a good job on that. But it went down through these and explained them all some. But we're not going to go through this like we did the powers of Congress and talk about each one, how it's been abused. So, all right, let's just start reading section 2. The very first phrase is something we want to talk about a little bit. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity. All right, that law and equity. I think the easiest way to think about the two, law would be a criminal case and equity would be a civil case. You know, if Davy would be a situation in this case of law, a criminal case, but if Megan took a baseball bat to Shim's car. Okay, there might be some criminal things there as well, but it could be, there's civil damages. Megan has damaged Shim's property, and he could go to the courts and say, this needs to be fixed, a civil charge. I almost said, if you remember back to the O.J. Simpson trials, but that you don't. I remember back to the O.J. Simpson trials, and I forget when that was, but I would think it was in high school. I just remember hearing about this case, this trial where he's found innocent, and then later hearing about another trial where he's found guilty. And I'm thinking, I thought the double jeopardy thing wasn't allowed. How was he tried twice? Right? The issue was, the first case was a criminal trial where the police and the prosecution were going after him for murder. The second case was a civil trial where the family of whoever the girl was going after him, and I think the wording was being responsible for the death or something like that. So he was found responsible and had to pay damages, but found innocent in the criminal case. So anyway, that's what it's getting at here. Criminal versus what we think of as a civil case. If you sue somebody, that would be a civil case as opposed to criminal. Yeah.
So, okay, if Devontae murders someone and I try him for first-degree murder and he's free, they say he's innocent, can I come back and try him for homicide? Like, say it wasn't first-degree homicide? Is
Some
that what
other-
you're saying? I mean, or would that be double jeopardy as well?
I think that'd still be double jeopardy. Yeah, there is some wiggle room there if some new evidence shows up or something like that, but the thought is you can't just keep running him through the court system until you find jury that will convict him. You just can't keep doing that. That would be fun, though.
Probably get for jaywalking.
Yeah. Well, that's how they got Al Capone for tax evasion. Okay, so that's the law and equity. That's what it's talking about there, civil and criminal cases. So, all right, let's continue the phrase. I'll start at the top. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising, and then we have here a list or kind of a general description, and then it goes on. Arising under this Constitution, so questions about the Constitution itself, the laws of the United States. Congress passes some law, and there's some judicial decision that has to be made. It goes to this court system. And treaties made, or what shall be made, under their authority. All right, so treaties. All those things. All right. And then we have this list continued of types of cases that fall into the judicial system, the national judiciary. So I'm going to read down through them. I'm not going to ask you to list for me 8 categories of things that fall here. I'm not going to do that. But if you just get in your mind things that involve the whole nation, that was the intent here. So let's just read down through them, and I think that's pretty clear. To all cases, this is the judicial power shall extend to all cases affecting ambassadors and other public ministers and consuls. All right, so there's some issue with an ambassador in America, goes there if somehow they weren't affected by diplomatic immunity. To all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, things on the ocean and seas. To controversies in which the United States shall be a party. Right? Devontae sues the federal government because I don't know, what did they do to you? He's black? I heard someone call this morning to say he's a white guy. He said, I've been discriminated against because I'm short. He said he couldn't go to the Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy and all these places because he was too short. He said that was before I don't think it was the Civil Rights Act. Anyway, he said the law has changed now, but when he applied, he was too short for all those things. But anyway, so you're not short, you're just black. I don't know. All right. Anyway, cases where where the United States is on trial, those don't go to the states. It goes to this court system. So it goes on to controversies between 2 or more states. Illinois and Indiana go over something. They argue that Illinois argues that the boundary is where it is, and Indiana is trying to argue that the boundary is a little bit east, and Gary's part of Illinois. We're trying to shift it over. Nobody wants it. All right, where does that go? It would end up here ultimately if that type of issue probably would not get in the courts. But if there's a dispute between 2 states, that goes to this court system. Again, you can think, well, the other option would be some state court, and which state gets to have the trial, Indiana or Illinois. And, obviously there's going to be some issues of fairness. All right, it goes on. The next one, mine has brackets around this, between a state and citizens of another state. That was amended by an amendment very, very quickly. But I think the basic state and a citizen of another state. You and Illinois go at it over something. Should Indiana hold the trial or Illinois hold the trial? So there's the 11th Amendment talks about this a little bit. And let me read it, and then I can tell you the basic gist of it. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subject of a foreign state. So the basic thought here is they're trying to distinguish who's bringing the case. All right, if a citizen brings the case, then it would go to the state courts. If Illinois went after you for something, that would go to the federal courts. It's the basic understanding. So anyway, some of these things you look at and think, what are they talking about? It depends on who's bringing the initiating the trial. So, all right, but between citizens of states and one state and another state, that goes here. Between citizens of different states, where would be a fair place to hold that one? Between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states. It'd be the Gary question. They're not claiming the land, they're unclaiming land. But anyway, questions about lands. And between a state or citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens or subject. You and Canada go at it over something. That would go to the national court system. Okay. All right, so the basic thought is national issues, things that involve the whole country, or things that would not be, there's not another place to have a fair trial, which state should hold it. This national judiciary would hold it. Okay, questions? I'm sorry for those of you that are purists and want to parse every word. I'm going to gloss over that part. Yeah, very good at acting disappointed. So, all right, let's go on here. This next paragraph talks about jurisdiction, and it has original and appellate jurisdiction in it. Does anybody know the difference between those two things? What do we mean by jurisdiction?
What was the other word?
Original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction. But just in general, jurisdiction.
An area which your power extends.
Yeah. If I try to make rules for Mr. Armacost's systematic theology class, I think it's Mr. Armacost, you can say, well, that's not within your jurisdiction. I don't have any right to dictate what he does in his class. Right? Pastor Dameron, it would fall within his jurisdiction to dictate what happened, but it would not be in mine. So this has to do with jurisdiction, which courts have authority, and it's making a distinction between the Supreme Court and the other courts that Congress makes. All right, so let's just read it. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and councils, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. So that small sliver of things go directly to the Supreme Court. Original jurisdiction, that phrase means the court that hears it first. All right, so those things that go straight to the Supreme Court. Everything else, in all other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, which means they can hear appeals. And the vast majority of all the things that the Supreme Court gets are on appeal. All right, all these cases, that have declared Obamacare constitutional, and the case that declared it's a constitutional right for two guys to get married, and all those things have been appealed to the Supreme Court. There's been a lower court that heard the initial trial, and the defendants appealed and eventually went to the Supreme Court, and they heard it there. So anything else can be appealed to the Supreme Court, and just that small sliver of things go directly there. Okay? I don't know if I've sometimes heard people argue, how come nobody ever gets any cases to the Supreme Court? Or how come the Supreme Court never rules about this or that? There has to be a case that they rule on. They can't, they're not just there arbitrarily making wise statements. They're not doing that. They can only take cases that are appealed to them. They can't go to some state and say, hey, we're the Supreme Court. We're going to tell you what to do. They've got to wait for it to get to them. They don't have that original jurisdiction. They're not the first ones to hear it. All right, appellate jurisdiction. Okay, then the sentence goes on there. I'll start at the beginning of the sentence. In all other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact. What did I do?
Sorry, I got confused with original and appellate.
Okay.
Is original the one that it goes straight to?
They're the first court to hear it.
Okay.
Yeah. You can think of Mr. Armacost as having original jurisdiction over systematics class, and Pastor Dameron would have appellate jurisdiction. If you don't like the grade on your test and he refuses to hear your claims, go ahead and talk to Pastor David. Just, I want to be around. I want to be close when it happens to here. So, but he would have appellate jurisdiction in that sense. So, all right. Did you raise your hand, Josh?
Oh, no, for her.
Okay. Okay, so original, they hear it first. Appellate would be the ones that hear it on appeal, hear it second, typically. All right. It has that phrase there, both as to law and fact. Should I ask if there's any ideas about what that means, or should I just tell you? No one has any idea? All right. What it's talking about is they can look at a case that's been appealed to them and look to see if the law has been applied correctly. You know, David gets convicted of armed robbery, and he didn't have any gun on him. So he appeals, and it goes to the Supreme Court. And they say, well, the law says for armed robbery you have to be armed. And David says, I'm not armed. I was never armed. So they can actually look at the law to see if the law is applied correctly. And then to fact, you can argue the facts of the case. David could say, that wasn't me on the videotape. That was somebody else. You know, the actual evidence brought in the case, as well as how the law is applied. That's what it's getting at. So both as to law and fact, those both can be argued before the Supreme Court. And then it goes on, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. Okay, so again, this whole thing is still underneath the control of Congress. I heard someone talking about abortion. And some of the anti-abortion groups push for an amendment to the Constitution, which would be fine and good. They say, we don't want just a law through Congress, because then the courts are just going to overturn it. Right? Congress can just say this cannot be heard in the court system. It's perfectly within the Congress's jurisdiction to just say this particular law cannot be challenged in federal courts. And then there's no way for it to be overturned. Now, they would argue somehow that was unconstitutional, but...
I want to say one of the candidates said that a while ago.
It was Hostetler, if you live around here, he was a member of Congress for a while. I haven't heard someone recently, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I think it was a while ago, but I thought it was one of the leading candidates right now. I thought it was Cruz. But just saying that they have the right, to tell the Supreme Court not to listen to this.
Yeah, it's perfectly within their jurisdiction. It's not ever been used a whole lot that I'm aware of, but it's right there. They can do it, and I think they should. And especially when the Supreme Court starts making crazy rulings, it just. No, they should. All right, questions there? Is this as bad as you were fearing? Megan saying, I'm not going to answer. I plead the fifth. I don't want to incriminate myself while we're being constitutional. All right, third paragraph of section 2. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury. Are we just going to be unfair to impeachment cases? Yes. Why is that thrown in there? Somebody new. Or at least a new hand. Used to tell people to bring a little chicken with them or something, right? It's a new hand. Why is impeachment explicitly exempted from this?
Does it deal with the higher authorities?
It does deal with the higher authorities, but where does their trial take place?
Supreme Court?
No? Somebody's saying, I think. Who holds the trial for impeachment cases? The Senate. All right, so there's already a separate procedure. This is just to make sure, again, we're talking about government bureaucrats. We want to make sure that's as simple as possible. All right, there's already a procedure to handle impeachment. It's just saying this doesn't apply there. We're not changing that. But all other, the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. That's pretty straightforward. Well, we'll get, we're going to talk about the whole judicial branch, and there's some places they've carved out where there's not a jury trial for some minor things, but we'll get to there. So, all right, a couple things about this jury. We kind of already talked about it some, but this is a very, very important check on the whole government, the judicial branch, but as well as the whole government. All right, literally the jury. let's say that Congress passes a law saying that it's a violation to wear scarves. All right. I was watching the girls sing last night, and everywhere you go, girl, I think it's curious how big they're going to get. Girl will be dragging these things here. All right, so somehow it's illegal to wear scarves. So some of you girls wear scarves, so you get drugged before the courts. You get tried, they have pictures of you, video of you, everything. You're found guilty. Or, I'm sorry, you're not found guilty. It gets sent to the jury. The jury can say, well, yeah, the Congress did declare this illegal, and they did do it, but you're innocent. It's completely in their hands. The law can say you're guilty. The evidence can say you're guilty. They can just say, no, you're free, completely free. Think of the check that is on government. Right? If they're wanting to prosecute somebody, they've got to get a group of private citizens to agree to it. And if they have that much authority, then it really forces the government to kind of step back and make sure they're not overstepping their boundaries. Now, that is not the way juries are instructed today. They're told that this is what the law says, and you have to rule based upon the law. But that is really not the case. Especially historically, it was intentionally part of it was to make sure you got a fair trial. You girls have got to come up with another name. Wear the scarves. You girls get a fair trial, but also to make sure the government is kept in its place. So it looked like I had a question or a comment, or
isn't that official term jury nullification? Or is that something different? Because I've heard that term around before.
I've heard the term too.
It's just where they're technically nullifying the law and saying it's a stupid law, or they more agree with.
Yeah, I would, without looking it up, I would say yes. But I've heard the phrase, but never really looked it up. So. Okay, so historically, this jury was an extremely powerful check on our runaway government. It has been undermined and weakened through the years, but it's there. So when you get to be on a jury, maybe you can challenge the system. Right? So anybody, none of you, I've been hoping to be on a jury, but I've never gotten picked. Other people in the office have gotten picked to go serve on juries. Mrs. Brady served as a jury for a federal trial in Crown Point. Other people just served on local trials, but not me. It'd be tough to get on the jury because no prosecution is going to want me on the jury. If some guy's there for rape or murder or something, well, what do you think should happen? Well, kill him? I'd have to very carefully answer the questions so that I wouldn't get thrown out, but it would be fun. But anyway, the point that the jury was extremely powerful check. It still is a check today, but not nearly as powerful as it has been historically. Okay, so all criminal trials face a jury. It's before a jury. It goes on. And such trial shall be in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed. Okay. Why is that phrase there?
Well, you wouldn't want to make it difficult for them to bring evidence and witnesses by saying, oh, we're going to have the trial 1,000 miles away.
Okay. Think of what happened during the revolutionary time frame where England declared that all the British officials would be tried in England. Think of the difficulty of getting evidence and people over there. All right. Think of you're accused of something and say, we're going to have the trial in Alaska. So you got to get people that can defend you as innocent to Alaska to testify. You got to just think of the difficulty of that. Can anybody think of another? Yeah.
Different states have different laws. Say if we wanted to have every murder.
Well, that is true. But we're talking here about federal things, national things, where that wouldn't be the case. It would be the same rules in all the different states.
We might have a state that likes you more.
Okay, where would typically you get the fairest jury pool? People that would be aware of you, and the fairest. Who would be the people in your area? That would be the fairest. So you're not. If you're in Alaska, they wow, would have been hotels I've seen. Alaskan bush people, or what is one of those realities? I don't want them to serve on my jury. Are you one of those? Anyway, the people in that area, they would not know anything about the situation where you were. You would tend to get a much fairer jury in that local area. So anyway, for reasons like that, it's got to be in the state where the crime was committed. Now, there are times where the defendant will ask for the thing to be moved to another state, and that is allowable. If I don't know, Davey, there's this statewide publicity campaign about what a wicked, rotten dog he is. And everybody walking down the street says, "Oh, let's just hang him, let's string him up." You can say, "I don't think I'm going to get a fair trial here," and he can request to have it moved, but the government can't yank the thing around. All right, does that make sense? So there's some leeway for that. You might have heard of some cases in the past where they move it to another state. It's for those type of extenuating circumstances. Sorry, but a basic rule of thumb: trial in the state where the crime's been committed. Let's go on. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law direct. Okay, so if you're out on Lake Michigan and something happens and it's not really inside of any state's territory, Congress would decide. And again, the thought is they're not going to take your particular case and have congressional hearings and where we're going to try Davey. They will just kind of have a blanket law. Anything happening here is going to go to this court, that type of thing.
What if they did like a serial killer, like murdered in some of the states? Where would that go?
That's a big fight. Well, actually, I'm thinking of the state charges. There was a guy a couple years ago who kidnapped a girl and took her through several states. And all the states wanted him to hold the trial. You might remember who I'm talking about. He was a pastor in Lake Station. But anyway, it was a big fight amongst all the states who got to have the trial. With the federal charges, it wouldn't be so much as a fight that way. But these were the states bringing state charges against them. There was a big fight. There's been some international cases where guys committed crimes in multiple countries. And it was the same type of fight. No, we want to execute it. No, we want to execute it. And there's usually one country that says, we don't believe in execution, so we're not going to allow him to be deported out of our country, and they just hold him. Usually something like that happens.
A little bit of a rabbit trail, but while you say internationally, what's the whole deal with people going to, what are those countries that you can't take people from to try them, like in North Africa? Where is that at?
Oh, they don't have an extradition agreement with us?
What's that country in North Africa that everyone always goes to?
Oh, I'm not sure, but there are some countries that the term extradition means refers to another country returning a criminal back to us. All right, and lots of places we have these extradition agreements with. We'll send people back to them and they'll send them to us. But there are some countries that won't extradite criminals to America, especially if they're going to face the death penalty. So sometimes people flee the country and get to those countries.
So how long do you have if you commit a crime in the States to leave and go to one of those countries?
Until you get caught. So, okay. Pretty straightforward, I think. Right. Section 3. An extremely novel thing at this point in history. The treason. Right? Treason against the United States. There's a tight definition of treason here. Anybody familiar with the French Revolution? Okay. Or I've just been listening to some lectures about espionage and covert operations. It started, went way back to Rahab and some of those types of things. You don't think of Rahab as a covert operator, but that's basically what she was. Anyway, talked about Germany and Russia and different places where all it took was a neighbor saying, "Oh, I think they said something bad about Stalin at dinner yesterday," and away you went. Okay, you were gone. So historically, this definition of treason has been very loose and vague, and we don't have that. We have a very tight definition of treason, which I think is appropriate. All right, here it is. Treason against the United States shall consist in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. That's it. It says nothing about making statements criticizing the president, nothing about disagreeing with their war policy. Levying war, actually directly fighting against us, Or then the second phrase is a little bit looser, adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Actually, the real thought there is giving physical assistance. You know, the ISIS terrorist shows up at your house and you feed them and go to Walmart and buy ammo for them, and you're giving aid and comfort to the enemy. That's the idea. Explicitly here and very intentionally not including just talking about the government or disagreeing with the government, which historically that has been a treasonous offense. So a very, very tight definition of treason. Okay. Questions about that? What about
the money that we're going to be giving to Iran is technically our enemy?
it's stupid.
But we're giving aid and
Yeah.
we'll buy something.
Are you trying to get me to say that Obama commits treasonous acts? Yes. Yes, I think he does. But I was thinking about Bo Bergdahl. Anybody remember him?
Who?
Bo Bergdahl. He was a Marine who left the base in Afghanistan and got captured by the Taliban, and they released him back to us. All right. You know, he tries to claim that anyway, the guy was a traitor. He left and joined the enemy. He falls in this category, but it really is, it's a tight thing. If he'd stayed on the military base and just said, I think our policies are stupid, that's not treason. But actually directly going and helping the enemy, that is. Dustin?
Oh, I was just going to say, didn't we give like 5 terrorists back?
Really nasty people back for him.
For a traitor.
Yeah. And I just heard recently, I think that they did finally level some charges against him, but I really haven't.
Yeah, they did a little while ago, actually.
Yeah. So I haven't followed what's happened recently. But the guy's a traitor, and that's a traitor. It'd been fun to see our president say, yeah, we know he's a traitor. We want to kill him ourselves. You know, that might have made it feel better, but we don't want them to kill him. We want to do it. So, Christina?
So he joined the army and then they like held him captive and claimed that he was.
That's what he claims, that he was held captive by them. But who knows? I mean, he voluntarily left the military base to go find them. Yeah. Several of our soldiers were killed trying to find him because he just disappeared. And in Afghanistan. I think it's Afghanistan.
2000, anyway.
It's several years ago. Bo Bergdahl, I remember seeing his family in the news and his parents, and guy's a traitor.
I know that because he was from Fort Richardson in Alaska there.
Oh.
All the guys in Alaska, all the military guys were so mad.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine. Yeah.
And he converted to Islam. Yeah, when he came back, he was talking about how he converted and
Yeah.
everything.
So anyway, that is a rabbit trail. But that wasn't your rabbit trail. That was mine. Mine aren't rabbit trails. Yours are. But anyway, the point is a tight definition of treason. If you think back to the French Revolution or some places like that, or even if you've ever Napoleon, and you disagree with him, or Napoleon falls out of power and the French government comes back in, and you at some point had said, I like Napoleon, so you get drug off for treason. That type of thing is explicitly not allowed here. It's just a tight definition, very tight. So, all right, so we have a definition of treason here in black and white in the Constitution. It goes on. No person shall be convicted of treason. Okay, it gets even tighter here. Unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. All right, so 2 witnesses to the same thing. All right, who do we want to pick on here? Everybody pointed to Amanda. Josh does look a little bit shady.
Yeah.
Look at that black suit coat. Mine's blue. So, all right, let's say that... you said Josh, didn't you?
Yeah,
Whatever. Let's pick Amanda. Let's think about Amanda. We could all have been eyewitnesses to her committing some treasonable act. But if we all saw different acts, then she could not be convicted. It says 2 witnesses to the same overt act. That we'd have to have 2 people that saw the same act, same thing. Does that make sense? It's a tighter thing. It can't be somebody writing an anonymous letter to the FBI and they drag you off and you're convicted of treason. 2 witnesses to the same act. Okay? I mean, there's other peripheries there. On the testimony of 2 witnesses, the idea of them actually testifying in court. You know, it can't just be this hidden person that wrote a letter. They've got to come and testify. It gives you a chance to challenge what they're saying. You know, some things built in it to make sure to tighten up this definition of treason. So, all right, so that, and then the other is confession in open court. Is that somehow referring to the areas between the key and the key on the basketball court, the open court? Sorry. I'm talking about basketball in the open court. What does it mean by the open court? Wow. Was it that bad, or are you guys asleep?
It would be not like a public hearing, or it would be a public hearing, not like something private where there's possibility
And probability. It's got to be in public. You in court saying, yes, I'm a traitor. Or yes, I did this activity. It can't be in the basement of the CIA headquarters where your toenails and fingernails are being pulled out. You make a confession and just take that to court and say, look, he confessed. All right, it's got to be an open court. Okay, and again, if you think back to medieval times and other places in history, that was the type of thing that was done. You know, and it's to eliminate all of that. Right? There's going to be 2 witnesses to the same act, or you've got to confess in open court. That's the only ways to be convicted of treason. Okay, so a tight definition. Okay, questions there? All right, last paragraph, blazing through this. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason. All right, so who gets to decide the punishment? Seeing who's awake? Congress does. Okay, Congress would lay this thing out. It wouldn't be, again, the idea is that Congress would set up a law laying out the punishment. They could, if they wanted, every time there's a trial for treason, to actually, you know, at that point, what are we going to do to Bo Bergdahl? Should we, you know, which ISIS method of execution should we use? I mean, that could be the discussion, but that's not done. They just have a law that describes the punishment that takes place. So they get to decide. It's not the president or the prosecutor or that type of thing. Congress decides. Okay, then we have a restriction, but no attainder of treason. Everybody follow what that means? Okay, it gets even better. Shall work corruption of blood. And we can't poison them? All right. Attainder of treason. That would be the punishment for treason. Think of a bill of attainder that just punished some group of people without a trial or anything. So this punishment of treason, it can't work corruption of blood. That means it can't apply to his descendants. Right? We're going to throw Bergdahl in jail and all of his children in jail to the 4th generation. You know, it can't be that type of thing. Right? We can punish him, but it can't go beyond him. And then the other one, for corruption, and then the other, for forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. All right, so we could take everything that somebody owns, them personally, but we can't take it from their children and so on down the line. So the basic thought is that only the person committing treason can be punished. We can't branch out to other family members. And again, if you think back to historical things, even the Soviet Union, if somebody was thought to be a traitor, typically the whole family gets drug in. You know, grandma, grandpa, cousins, uncles, aunts, the milkman. You know, everybody gets sucked into that thing. So just the person committing the treason is affected. So, okay, so I think it's appropriate to have this treason reined in here tightly. It's not a. The intention wasn't for it to be a political tool, but for people that really were traitors. We do need to prosecute traitors. So, okay, questions about that? All right. Anybody have anything good for breakfast? Is there anybody alive? I had one of my favorite breakfasts. It's not quite my all-time favorite. Biscuits, homemade buttermilk biscuits, sausage gravy, 3 eggs over easy, and then more sausage gravy all in one big pile. The only way to improve it is to have biscuits, gravy, hash browns, gravy, eggs, gravy. That's even better. But we didn't have any hash browns, so
We have same biscuits.
you want to come out to my house and eat? So anyway, breakfast for me is very good. I don't know if you guys had cold cereal down there in the kitchen, but mine was very good. It might have been, was it cold hot cereal? So, okay. If there's no questions about the actual text and what we just read through it, there are some other things about the judicial branch that I want to talk about they're significant about the national level judiciary. So they fit best here. So, all right, these other things. The first one is judicial review. Judicial review. Okay, the basic thought here is this is the power of the courts to declare something unconstitutional. Some action of the government, some law passed by Congress, to declare something unconstitutional. Judicial review. Okay, which is a legitimate power of our government, of the judicial branch. Congress passes a law making it illegal to wear sweaters. Right? You girls could challenge it in the court system and ride it all the way to the Supreme Court. And you could argue there's nowhere in the Constitution does Congress have the authority to regulate sweaters. But then one of the lawyers for the government would say, well, you know, you wore it across state lines, therefore it falls under interstate commerce. They would somehow argue it. But anyway, that is the legitimate power of the courts to declare some law or some action unconstitutional. The president's amnesty plan, the courts should declare that unconstitutional. He doesn't have the authority to, on his own, change the immigration policies of our country. That has to go through Congress. That's a legitimate thing. Okay, a couple of thoughts about that before we look at the way that's abused. The decision should be based on the Constitution. Well, that might go without. It's sad that we have to state that, but there have been people that argue the court should declare something unconstitutional, and part of their argument is, well, no other industrialized country does this. There's people that argue that way about the death penalty. Well, this doesn't happen in any other, we're the barbarians in the civilized world. Well, that doesn't matter, right? We're arguing about the Constitution. Okay, so the argument's got to go back to the Constitution, not international opinion or public opinion. It's a constitutional thing. That's one. And then the second thing is that the court really only has a negative power. They can declare that was unconstitutional. That's it. They can't go on and declare what the law should be. All they can say is that activity you did was unconstitutional. The president can't do that. That law from Congress banning sweaters was a violation of the Constitution. That's it. Okay, and that's a needed and legitimate power. Okay, when this judicial review gets abused, we refer to it as judicial activism. And that is when one of those two things isn't true. Either the decision is not based on the clear meaning of the Constitution, or they go on and declare what the law should be. All right? And there's been a lot of cases in the last 60 years or so, 70 years, where the courts have declared something was constitutional or unconstitutional, and it's on very, very shaky constitutional grounds. All right? Or they will say that's unconstitutional, and to fix it you have to do these things. They have no authority to say you have to do these things. All right, so when we talk about judicial activism, it's one of the two things. Either it's not really based on the Constitution, or they've gone on to declare what the law should be. And that is not the job of the courts. In the Federalist Papers, which I'm sure are right in the front of your mind, number 78. Okay. The courts must declare the sense of the law if they be disposed to exercise will instead of judgment. Anybody remember that question? The consequences will be the substitution of their pleasure to that of the legislative body. So anyway, they are there to declare the judgment, but will, in our words, that would be the judicial activism. That is not their job. Okay? An example. Roe v. Wade, 1972. 72 or 73? I got 72 here, but I thought it was 73.
I think it's 73.
I think it's 73. We'll take Devontae's word for it. And the reason I said 73, I was born in 72, and I've always thought I just made it. You know, it was still illegal when I was born. My parents might have killed me. So, just made it. Roe v. Wade. This is literally the argument. I'm not going to read the actual words, but this is the argument. Have you heard this before? He's holding his face. They cite, different court cases and this, and then they come down and they say, in the penumbra of the Bill of Rights, which the penumbra is the edge of the shadow. So you have the Bill of Rights, and there's this shadow cast by it, and somewhere on the edge of that is a right to privacy, which is a stretch. And then they go on to they just state that. And then to say that right to privacy also includes the right to an abortion. And that's the constitutional ground that case is on. All right? Liberals who are honest, and they're hard to find, but if you find a liberal who's honest that's familiar with this, they will say, yeah, that's a horrible argument. They like the result, but they will acknowledge this is a horrible argument. So, yeah.
Not to maintain the subject or nothing, but does that same thing apply to that recent bill they just passed about same-sex marriage? Does that same thing fall into that?
I didn't actually look up the law and see how they argue that one. Probably something equally shaky. So, okay, so there would be an example of judicial activism, very, very based loosely on the Constitution. Loosely is too strong of a word. So, another example, and this one's off the top of my head, so hopefully I get all the story right. The Supreme Court ruled in the Civil Rights era that it was a violation of the Constitution, equal rights of equal protection of the law, for there to be a black and a white school. Right? Before the court had ruled that, back in the late 1800s, that as long as they were equal, it was fine. You couldn't have a black school that was dilapidated and falling apart and a white school that was pristine and clean. They had to be equal, and it was fine. The court said, oh no, that's a violation of the Constitution. You have to integrate them. And then the court went on to mandate that these school districts begin to integrate and bring white students to the black school and black students to the white schools. Okay? And there's the governor of Arkansas resisted this. Now, I'm not saying he was perfect, but he gets branded as this horrible racist because he didn't want the black kids in a white school. But he also was saying that the court doesn't have this authority. Right? It'd been one thing if Congress passed a law saying this, but it was just the court saying, this is a violation of the Constitution, and to fix it, you've got to do these things. Right, and that the court does not have that authority. Liberals have brainwashed our country into thinking that the court does have this authority. Right, but it really, all they can declare literally is an opinion. They don't have any mechanism to enforce it, but the other branches of government like the decision so much that they enforce them. And really, again, I don't agree with the governor and everything, but that point is very valid. The court had no authority to make that decision. Whether or not the argument about the schools being segregated was a violation, that's another issue. Them declaring you have to segregate or you have to integrate, that was not their job. So, okay, judicial activism. Questions on that? Much of what the court does today is judicial activism. The gay marriage thing. All right. We still got more to cover with the judicial branch, but not too much more. There's a few other peripheries that we need to talk about, but we're not going to get them in today. So I want to talk about two things. Let me just give you the two things. I want to talk about why it's important for this judicial branch to be independent. We talked about how it's a very independent branch of government and, the pay and other things that create it to be that way. Talk about why it's important. And then the last thing I want to do is describe very briefly the federal court system. How is this, it's up to Congress to do this. There's a Supreme Court and whatever other courts Congress wants. And just briefly describe how it's done. It can change at the whim of Congress, but at least at this point, describe the basics of that system. But we'll do that next week.